Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge.
Hi, I'm Katie Crane, the Pilates professional, and this is episode 11 of the Pilates Lounge. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today. I've decided today to kind of keep rolling on, marrying the topic of the last two episodes, because I feel like there's almost tentacles that reach out to so many smaller topics that integrate into the understanding of stress and the understanding of pain. Whether you have pain in your body, whether you are feeling stressed in your life, or whether you're working with people who are experiencing those things. So today I am touching on the vagus nerve. Now, before I get started, if you have not listened to the previous two episodes, then I definitely recommend that you go back and have a listen to them. The episodes specifically on pain, the physicality of pain, and on stress, so that you could have a broader picture of today's topic. Now, the vagus nerve is a beautiful system in the body, and I think of the vagus nerve as its own entity in the body. It's not really how the body works, but the vagus nerve, vagus in Latin means meandering. So if you consider this nerve, it meanders through the body and it touches on and innervates pretty much every organ in the body. And it also shares dura or tissue with many very important parts of the body. And it's a very, very integral part of what we play with as a Pilates professional. And I'm going to explain that concept as we go. But the vagus nerve ultimately regulates inflammation in the body. And when I first understood that concept, it just blew my mind that there was something or a part of the body that is responsible for or regulates inflammation. But it wasn't just like, I couldn't quite understand how that would work when I first heard that being talked about, which is why I started to look deeper into it. And then I learned that when we have inflammation in the body, it's never just on one part of the body. It ends up being a systemic experience. And this is where the vagus nerve comes into it, because the vagus nerve does innervate so many different body systems or body parts or mechanisms. It's not like you could just be inflamed in one area if it's one nerve. It's a single nerve. It just has many, many branches. So then if you have inflammation in the gut, then if that inflammation is not dealt with, that inflammatory response is going to travel to another part of the body or to another system, or it's going to continue to increase until either that inflammation is dealt with or it turns into potentially an insidious disease. So I want you to consider that if we can regulate inflammation, if we can prevent the expansion of inflammation in the body, then ultimately we can reverse or prevent long-term chronic diseases. Now, when your vagus nerve is not working well, we talk about it being low in tone. So I guess you could consider the vagus nerve, when it's functioning well, is similar to a muscle that's functioning well. So if a muscle is functioning well, it has really great structure, it's strong, has a lot of blood flow in it, has a lot of oxygen, and it's working optimally. The same is true with the vagus nerve. So there are things that we can do to help what's called tone the vagus nerve so that it does have a better response to regulating inflammation. But if we don't tone the vagus nerve, then inflammation can go from being acute in one area to becoming systemic. And systemic means throughout the entire body. And that's when people would end up with something like an autoimmune disease, potentially cancer, potentially diabetes, heart disease, potentially leaky gut, or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which quite often those things are married with each other. So quite often somebody who has one of those things will have multitudes of those things. I was listening to another podcast the other day and they were talking about now there are studies showing that, in fact, low vagal nerve tone is associated with asthma. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about things that we know that work for asthma and potentially how that may actually be honing the vagus nerves. I always thought of it just strengthening the lungs, but in fact, the vagus nerve shares dura or shares tissue with the diaphragm, which is one of the muscles of breathing. Okay, so let's lean into this a little bit more. The vagus nerve, remember I said, is known as the meandering nerve. So it meanders all through the body. And some of the parts that it touches on is actually from the medulla of the brainstem. So it's known as the cranium, the fifth cranium nerve. So it comes from the brain, from the brainstem. And it actually comes down, you know, where there's the SCM. So the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid, they're these massive big muscles that grow out of the back of the skull on either side and come down on either side of the neck and then grow into the clavicle. So if you would just touch just underneath your earlobe, that's where your sternocleidomastoid grows out of. And then you could follow. It's a beautiful, long, strong strip of muscle down to the collarbones. So the vagus nerve follows down behind there. Now get this, with that in mind, so as a movement educator, what do we often see in studio? It's very common for us to be working with people who lack good rotation of the head. They struggle to move through the cervical. Maybe they've been in a position where they're forward facing all the time. Maybe they're in a slouch position, so they don't have the best posture in the world. Maybe they're a little bit frozen through the upper body, so they're struggling just to let go. Whatever the case may be, if somebody cannot turn their head, then potentially vagus nerve is getting entrapped by the sternocleidomastoid. So things that we can do to help those people is some mobility through the neck, maybe side stretches through the neck, lateral movement, some rotation of the head. So on the Pilates machines, we could be thinking some sort of mermaid or some sort of twist movement is going to facilitate a little bit better mobility. We could be thinking thoracic extension. So we're trying to get them to open up through the front of the chest and actually mobilize the upper back, the upper mid back to help alleviate some tightness. Now, a study was done, and this is why I'm telling you this in particular, of women who have gut issues. Now, remember, I said that meandering nerve, the vagus nerve, it innervates many different parts of the body. And we know that low vagal tone can be associated with things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So it's safe to say that it's probably associated with many different gut issues because part of its job is to innervate the gut. So a study was done with women who had gut issues, and what they did with these women was actually improve the movement of the cervical, improve the movement, the mobility of the neck to release the entrapment of the vagus nerve around that area, and then their gut issues started to recede. So when we work with somebody in a Pilates setting or in a movement setting or even work on our own body, sometimes things happen down the line. So we might see that somebody looks tight in the neck. They look like they can't move. They look like their shoulders are up around their ears. But we don't realize that what's actually happening when we facilitate that movement is this beautiful knockoff effect throughout the entire body, because we know that the body doesn't just work just the neck on its own. We know that all the body parts are enmeshed, are working together. But sometimes I wonder if we really take into account that it's more than just muscle. It's not just that slings are working in the body. It's not just movement of the neck affects movement of the arms or movement of the torso. It's that the entire system is being connected to, or the entire system is being serviced when we release tightness in areas, or when we improve movement in areas. So that was just one study that I found. Now, moving down from the cranium down through the SCM, the sternocleidomastoid, then the vagus nerve then touches on the heart, on the diaphragm, and the back of the thyroid. So that whole area could be affected by low vagus tone. Also, breathing is innervated by good vagus tone or by the vagus nerve. Our voice is innervated by the vagus nerve. So if you're struggling to find your voice, or if you're struggling to speak, if you're struggling to find breath, especially deep breath, then potentially you have low vagus tone. This is a beautiful thing for us to know as Pilates professionals, because one of the principles that we teach is breathing. So just by teaching our clients how to breathe well, and Joseph Pilates said it more than 100 years ago, breathing is it's the first thing that we do when we enter the world. And it's the very last act of life. Yet throughout our life, many of us never learn how to breathe well. So I've talked about breath before, and I'm sure I'll talk about it again at some stage. But if we can integrate some breathing exercises into the Pilates work that we're teaching with somebody, then that on its own can help innervate the vagus nerve or improve vagal tone. So good vagal tone is really about that entire meandering nerve, that entire system, I imagine it like a waterfall almost going through the body, working well. I'm going to go through some breathing techniques in a little bit, but I just want you to put that in your toolkit and understand that teaching breathing is super, super important, and making sure that people are not holding the breath. So from there, the vagus nerve, I said that it goes down through the diaphragm. Then it actually touches through a muscle called the psoas. Now, the psoas is also known as the fight or flight responder. Now, in ancient times, like when we were literally hunters and gatherers, when we were living in caves and we were hunting for food, it is believed that the psoas would actually act as a protector. So it has this protection mechanism. And I believe that the vagus nerves plays a role in that. Now, you may or may not have heard of the polyvagal theory. Now, the polyvagal theory is a theory that was introduced by Dr. Stephen Porges. And he talks about, or he explores the connection between the vagus nerve and our body's response to stress. And in response, I mean our fight or flight response. So there's actually 3 responses that we have: freeze, flee, or fight. So either if you are under stress or under perceived stress, and I talked loosely about this in the episode when I did talk about stress, if you are under stress, then you are either going to stand up and fight. So your blood starts running fast, your heart rate is beating, you get this hit of adrenaline and you are up for the fight. You're going to do whatever it takes to save yourself and to protect your family, thinking of a tribal experience. Or you're going to freeze. You're going to roll up into a ball and you're going to pretend that you do not exist. You're going to stop breathing. Everything's going to slow down, and you're going to hope to the Almighty One that whatever it is that was coming to attack you either doesn't realize that you're there or thinks that you're dead. So you have chosen, or your body's response to the stress is chosen to freeze, or you're choosing to flee. So you are running from that danger like nothing else. So your blood is pumping, you're sweating, all of your adrenals are producing adrenaline, and you are out of there. You are going to run for your life. Now, the two main responses, of course, are to fight or flee. But if fight or flee doesn't work, or if fight or flee has been overcome or have been so stressed, then we tend to freeze. So we might see a freeze response. If you've ever watched like those programs out on the Serengeti plains in South Africa and you watch this amazing exercise of a big cat chasing a springbok, at some stage that springbok stops running and just starts freezing and starts shaking, right? So that's almost like, I give up, there's nothing I can do. The reality of it is we see people in the studio in this freeze response. Maybe we don't recognize it. In Western society, Western culture, we certainly don't talk about it. It's one of our downfalls. In my country and in most Western societies, we do not talk about how we are truly feeling. It's not cool to express our failures, our downfalls, our pitfalls when we're not succeeding. But the freeze response is almost like when you've got nothing left and you're just going to shut down in the face of danger. So this is associated with the collapse of reactions, and it's seen in the extreme stress situations, but it would also be seen in when you've felt so much stress for an extensive period of time. So you've been under chronic stress and then you just shut down. Well, the polyvagal theory, partly Dr. Stephen talks about this stress response being associated with our ability to communicate and our ability to promote relaxation and fostering social engagement. So when our nervous system is working well, or for our nervous system to work well, we are tribal beings. We must be in social situations. And, when every now and then I bring this up, but, there really have been some awful, heinous crimes in the last few years. When those lockdowns happened worldwide and people were not allowed to see their loved ones, people were locked up in their homes. If you lived in a big city, in a small apartment, you were never allowed to leave that apartment. I knew elderly people that never saw somebody before they passed away. The elderly people passed away on their own without any family support. Women gave birth on their own without any family support. So many horrible, horrible things happened, all in the name of health. And so many times I stood up and kept trying to shout from the rooftops, this is not okay. This is not about good health, because good health, for human beings to be in good health, for your vagus nerve to be toned. And remember, your vagus nerve regulates all of the inflammation in your body. So for your body to be healthy, to even have the ability to respond to any type of virus, you need good vagal tone. And to have good vagal tone, you must be socially interacting with other people, not online, not on the telephone, face-to-face, in person, touching other people. So you know who struggled the most, you know who suffered the most were the people who were locked up for the longest period of time. And I can tell you now, I live in a place where we weren't locked up very much. I live pretty remote. Even when we weren't meant to, I was down the beach. We were socializing all the time as a family. We just did because it was actually illegal what they told you to do. But the majority of people followed what they were told. The majority of people stayed home, didn't socialize. Now, as a result, we are now seeing children with more anxiety than what we've ever seen before. PTSD, anxiety, and all of the diseases that go with long-term chronic stress. We're seeing this in children because parents were doing what they thought was the right thing to do, even though if you actually looked at the logic behind it all, there was no logic in what you were being told. But unfortunately, the majority of the population don't look for logical outcomes. They are so easily swayed by fantastic marketing tactics. That's what we saw. So for your vagus nerve to be well-toned, you must be socializing with other people. You must have social engagement. It's a part of our parasympathetic response. It's a part of your ability to stay healthy. So if we understand the interplay between all of that, so far, we're only halfway through the body, then potentially you can see how when you're not with people, and you know what? I'm not a big social person. I love my own company, but I go to work and see clients, and that's my hands-on interaction with people. And that's important for my health. I very much realize that. But you know those feelings that you've ever had? Like, do you remember the feelings? Like, let's take you back for a little bit, into those lockdowns that happened. And, for the first couple of weeks, maybe for the first 7 weeks, oh yeah, they were good. They were great. You got to be with family. You weren't forced to go to work, all these wonderful things. But long term, what we saw was a deterioration within the psychology of society. We saw increased fear response within society. And then now the long-term outcome, because we're 2 years past the fact, we're still seeing very, very depressed people in society. This is what we are seeing. I'm seeing this in a place where we did not have the lockdowns that a lot of places had, but we did have a lot of people move up here from down south, and a lot of people from one of the most locked down cities in the world moved up to where I live. And those people have been coming to us specifically for stress, for emotional stress, the emotional toil that this all took. Now, the amazing thing about the vagus nerve is that it can definitely respond, or you can increase the tone, you can improve the tone by doing certain activities. But let's keep going through the body before I go through the activities. So then we've gone through the gut, remember? And then I also talked about asthma at the start of the show. Now, when I was growing up, I always thought, I understood that children or people with asthma were often sent to go swimming. And of course, swimming's an awesome exercise. But now that I understand the vagus nerve and the role that it actually plays in the body, it may not have been the physical activity of swimming, but rather the breath control that swimming demands that was helping with the asthma, in the fact that the vagus nerve innervates through the diaphragm and the lungs and the heart as well. As well as that, the vagus nerve also innervates on the blood vessels, so helping open and close the blood vessels, on the lymphatic system, so helping the cleansing of the lymph system. And the way that the vagus nerve works, and the way that nerves in general work, is that there's this biodirectional information. So there's information that goes from the body to the brain, and then there's information that goes from the brain to the body. So let's go back to the fight or flight response. That is information from the brain to the body. So remember I talked about stress in one of the other episodes, and I talked about there being perceived stress or actual stress. So perceived stress is when we think of there being stress. So it may be like if you took, your sister's having trouble with her partner, it's got nothing to do with you, but you perceive it as stress. Or if you're walking down a dark alley, was the notion that I spoke about in episode 9. You're walking down a dark alley, and when you're a kid, your parents told you that was a dangerous thing to do. So your brain already thinks that, even though nothing is going to happen, but you think that it is. So that's perceived stress. Or real stress, the real threat would be that there actually is somebody down the dark alley and that person is coming to attack you. So that's a real stress. But where was I going with it? I forget. So, that's right. So the communication with the brain. So that is the brain telling the body, right? So that's 20% of the information through the vagus nerve is from the brain to the body. So the brain tells the vagus nerve, you are in danger. And then the vagus nerve innervates parts of the body to expel that stress response, including the psoas. So remember, I said that in primal times, the psoas was thought of as a protector. So you're running through the Serengeti, you're getting chased by the lion that was also chasing the springbok, and you're running ahead of the big cat that's chasing you. It is thought that the psoas would respond by flaring up, almost like a bat wing, I imagine. So the psoas, let's remember, it grows out of the front of the spine, around about from the belly button. Like if you were to put your palm on your belly with your pointing finger resting on your belly button and your other fingers down from your belly button down towards your pelvis, that's about the size of your psoas connections, where your psoas grows out of the spine, grows out of the front of the spine. And it literally looks like this beautiful shelf. And then it kind of does a little flip over and then grows back into the very top of the leg. But on that big shelf of the psoas, you know what sits there is your organs. So the psoas actually acts as, they call it a shelf for your organs. But if we think of it as a protector, and it is innervated by the vagus nerve, what happens is when you're under stress, so say you're running from that big cat and it reaches out to swipe you on your back, if the psoas is working as a protector, which has been innervated by that vagus nerve, then it's going to flare up, and hopefully those big cat claws, they might go through all of the muscles in your back and they might get all the way to your spine. Gee whiz, that's a big gash in your body. But maybe because the psoas is flared up, your organs don't get touched. Your organs are safe from getting destroyed. Because if your organs get destroyed, then chances are you're not going to survive that attack. But if your organs do not get destroyed, then chances are you can heal from something like that. Now, obviously, we don't live in a world where we're getting chased by saber-toothed tigers anymore or by big cats anymore, but we do live in a very stressful environment. And remember from that episode 9, there's those perceived stresses and those real stresses. Well, the body and the brain doesn't know which is real and which is not. It's just you have the same response. So if you are constantly under stress, or if you are under stress, you're in that fight or flight response, then potentially the psoas is flaring up to, in italics, save the body or protect the body, and then your organs are getting saved. But if that response never lets go, if that is always like that, then because the vagus nerve innervates the psoas and then innervates some of the organs, including the gut, an overactive psoas response or a tight psoas, you could say, potentially could mean that you're going to end up with gut issues as well. So what does an overactive, or what is a tight psoas? What does it feel like? Here are some things that you may be familiar with in the studio or maybe even in your own body. Think of where it grows out of. And I always talk about muscles grow out of your bones. There is nothing in your body that is attached to anything else. That really is a bugbear of mine when people say, this muscle attaches to that bone. No, it doesn't. Nobody ever stuck and pasted you together. Everything grew from within. Everything actually grew from this beautiful cellular structure, this cell, and everything became and spiraled out until it became your body. Now I am going to do, or maybe I'll talk about it now. So the psoas grows out of your spine, the front of your spine. Remember, it's about as wide as your palm, say. It's like from, don't quote me on this, like look it up in a textbook, but it's around about from L5 to L1, maybe. Anyway, check that out. But it's pretty much your whole lumbar spine, but from the front of it. It's quite magnificent. Most muscles that innervate or that grow from the spine actually from the back of the spine, and the little wings of each vertebra. But this actually grows from the front of the spine. Okay, so it grows out from the front of the spine. It does a little flip and then grows. Oh, that's right. So things that you could be feeling if you had a tight psoas. So it grows out of the front of the spine, big kind of shelf-like, and then it actually flips. It does a little flip over. And then it grows to the very, very top of your leg, a little nodule just kind of near the very top of your femur bone. And that's where psoas connects or grows into. So physiologically or anatomically, I suppose, from a movement perspective, psoas is responsible for the pendulum swing of the leg. It assists with the leg swinging forwards and backwards during your gait cycle, during your running, during your walking. The types of movement that in italics would feel like they're stretching the psoas would be like a deep lunge. And when you're lunging, it would be that back knee that is kind of stretching the psoas out or actually working it in its full capacity. So you're finding eccentric tone in that movement. So when the psoas is too wound up, too much going on, then you may feel like you've got gut issues or tummy problems. You may feel like you've got a sore lumbar spine. You may feel like you've got tight hip flexors, so tight in deep into the hip. You may also feel like you're tight through the side of your body or in the just kind of in the side front of your belly. So quite often, if you go to a masseuse or to a physiotherapist or a physical therapist, then they will palpate the front of the body, just on the side at the front, to see if they can feel if psoas is tight. And it's really common for physical therapists to want to literally palpate psoas. Some people are really adverse to this. And you know it feels if your psoas is tight and you have a physical therapist put a lot of pressure into it, then it literally makes you feel like internally you want to jump off the bed. Remember, it's part of your fight or flight responder because of its relationship to the vagus nerve and because of the vagus nerve's relationship to your fight, flee, or freeze response according to the polyvagal theory. So it's pretty normal. Sometimes I'll palpate just to figure out if it is the psoas that is the problem when people are feeling the sore back, the sore hip flexors, or the sore hips, or the sore tummy. Sometimes psoas does act a little bit as a core support as well. So it is part of our core structure. And doing things like lunges and even swinging the leg, quite often I'll get people just to stand. Say if your right side is really tight, at home I send people home with this exercise where the right side is tight. I've done a little bit of palpating and they feel like they want to jump off the table. I ask them if that's what they feel like. And then I'll do it on the other side and see if they get the same response or not. And if they get that feeling of wanting to jump off the table, then I'll talk about, do you have any tummy problems, any gut issues at all? And I go deep into all of that stuff as well. But if you're not ready for that, that's okay. I get them to say, so the right side is tight, stand on a step with the left foot or the left foot on the step. Let the right leg just dangle off. Now we're going to get gravity to take on the weight of your leg that's dangling. So remember, Pilates is really about changing the relationship with gravity. So allowing for that right leg to dangle off of the step, just allow for the weight of the leg to swing backwards and forwards. I learned this from Madeline Black. If you haven't done any of her workshops, she's brilliant. So you allow for the leg to swing backwards and forwards, recognizing that purpose of the psoas, the mechanical purpose is that pendulum movement. And you're not kicking the leg. You're just allowing for the weight of the leg to swing backwards and forwards. And you do that for about a minute or so. Sometimes I do integrate some flexion extension of the spine because of where psoas comes out of in the spine. It does partly have a role in extension of the spine as well. So we flex and extend the spine, keep allowing for the leg to move backwards and forwards for about a minute or so. Then we stand back onto the step, or I get the client to stand back onto the step with both feet evenly. And I always just ask them, what do you feel in that side? Sometimes they're able to communicate that with me immediately. But, sometimes people struggle to explain how things feel. So some cues that I offer them to help them share that information with me is, does that side feel lighter? Or do you feel like there's more space on that side? Or do you feel a little bit taller on that side? Most of the time people will say, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. So I know psoas has now released. So what has that done? That has started to tone the vagus nerve. Amazing, right? Okay, let's think of other things that we could do to help tone the vagus nerve. Now, remembering that vagus nerve starts at the cranium, comes down the back of the throat, the sides of the throat. It's all these beautiful branches that go through the body. what about to integrate some specific breathing techniques? So not only do we want to be teaching lateral breath, so remember the lateral breath is what we initially teach our students so that they can engage those deep abdominals. But now I've just spoken about psoas being a part of that abdominal structure or that core structure. And psoas innervated by vagus nerve, but also vagus nerve innervating the breath and the voice. If we play around with some of our breath practice, then that too can have a response to the vagus nerve. So remember at the start of the show, and I briefly touched on, if we're having a response of stress or an inflammatory response in one part of the body, because vagus nerve being the regulator of our body stress response or inflammatory response, if we're experiencing that in one part of the body, we can work with that part. But the human nature tells us as Pilates professionals that not many of us really tap into that initial inflammatory response in the body. Quite often we wait and we keep doing the things that are not serving us well until that inflammation does become more systemic. We wait, we have the sore, maybe we've got a little bit of a sore tummy, but we don't do anything about it. And then the sore tummy becomes a sore back. And then the sore back becomes a kidney problem. And the kidney problem becomes an adrenal problem. An adrenal problem becomes a sleeping issue. That's just how we are as humans, unfortunately. We're not very proactive. And partly, I wonder, it's our environmental experience. It's the environment in which we live in really doesn't lend itself to us listening to the body. But if we go back to the polyvagal theory, communication, social interaction, social engagement, touching other people, we're lacking that anyway. So not only is our vagus nerve not as toned as what it could be for most of us, for many of us anyway, I think that that's pretty fair to say. Our society, our environment in which we live in just doesn't lend itself to good vagus tone anyway. Okay. Back to the breath work. So we teach lateral breathing, amazing for the core. We know that. But what about if we teach some different types of breathing as well? So if the vagus nerve is responsible for our voice, if we practice humming or singing, your choice, maybe you send your clients home to sing. I ain't going to sing in front of anybody else. I can tell you that, but I love singing at home. I'll quite happily hum with the class though. And it sounds something like this. I breathe in through my nose. It's long, it's deep, and at the end, it has a little bit of vibration. The vibration is very important. Now, that wasn't my best hum I've ever done. I'm just going to let you know that because I kind of did it off the bat. I actually like to do a few hums and I find if I do a few, but I don't want to wig you out today, so I'm not going to do it. But I do find that if I do a few hums, I can get deeper. And you may have experienced that even in your teaching. I remember when I first started teaching and I used to teach from throat and I used to go home with a really sore throat. I always felt like I was getting a throat infection. And I see this in new instructors all the time. We're teaching from our throat. We're teaching from a point of anxiety, of nervousness, of not feeling like we're holding the room. And as we get better at our teaching, as we gain confidence and as we feel like we can really take on the room, then the way that we speak becomes deeper. We start speaking from our belly and not from our throat. So when we practice this humming, it's really important to try and find that hum from your throat. So you want to try and find a little bit of vibration. The way that I do this in a class, because I know that it's weird, but you know what? They do it in yoga all the time. So it's not like people are completely unfamiliar with it. A lot of the time, people who come to Pilates, they've practiced some sort of other experience anyway, So if you think of different cultures all around the world, there are many different cultures that practice chanting, humming, singing, and different breathing techniques. In Western world, it's like we become too embarrassed. It's like you're not allowed to anymore express yourself with sound. We're taught to be quiet and that to be quiet is the better way to be. But in fact, We are communicators, and we need to be communicating with our own body and with the environment for our body to be working optimally. So we are in a position as Pilates professionals, and if you're not a Pilates professional and if you're a movement lover, you are now in a position, because now you have an understanding, to practice this type of thing in your own body. You can do it in private. Nobody needs to be hearing you. But as a Pilates professional, I absolutely share it with the class. And you know what? Not everybody does it. And I always say something like, don't feel weird. Everyone else is doing it right now. Make a little bit of a joke about it. Loosen up a little bit. Don't be such a tight ass all the time. It feels weird for all of us, but this is for our own good. So humming, singing, breathing, but also other things that tone the vagus nerve. This is potentially something that we could do in studio, is when we're holding the breath, but holding the breath with intention. So remember I said that the vagus nerve is, I think of it like a muscle. So for it to be toned, it needs to be capable. So our body is designed to be under stress, but it's just not designed to be under chronic stress. And I talked about that in episode 9 as well. So you can choose to put your body under stress. So controlled stress is something like holding your breath. Maybe you take a breath in, you hold that for 4 seconds, 8 seconds, whatever feels okay. You breathe out, you hold it at the end of the exhale for 4 or 8 seconds. So get your class to do that as well. There's no reason that you can't integrate that into your class. It's a type of meditation. So meditation has been shown to tone the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is designed for us to go into ourselves, for us to spend time in reflection, for us to spend time observing internally and externally. Because ultimately, as tribal beings, if we take away all of the facade in which we live, we are designed to be in nature. And if you watch those animal shows, I grew up watching David Attenborough. He was my favorite. And if you watch those animal shows, they're not just in their environment. They are as one within their environment. They are so aware of everything that's happening around them. And we have senses as well. We have the eyes, the ears, the taste, the nose, but quite often we're just not using them all. So vagus nerve is asking you to access those senses. Use your eyes, observe the moment in which you are in. Use your ears. Vagus nerve innervates the ears. So things like music can help tone the vagus nerve. So not only could you sing, you could listen to music and listen to different music and be aware of how it makes you feel internally. Different people respond to different types of music, but culturally, music is a part of cultures all around the world, whether it's with singing or playing instruments. Before we spoke to each other, we played instruments. Before we learned words, we were playing music. And then as we developed, we started singing that music. And that's why our body has such an emotional response to when we listen to music. When you go to a concert, partly that's that environmental structure, that community structure, but also it's the music. It tones the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve innervates hearing. Now, some other things that you could send people home to do is cold water on the face. When I talk about cold water, I mean ice water. It's not having an ice bath. And I want to be very clear on that. So I definitely use ice bath as part of my self-care routine, as part of my optimal health routine. But for vagus nerve to be innervated and toned, you must get water on your face because our senses mostly are on the face. And so you need to get the entire face wet. So you could just get like a bucket or a bowl of water, pop some ice blocks in it, and then you need to submerge your face into that bowl. It can be very, very intimidating and very uncomfortable, but that's okay. The body builds resilience from uncomfortable situations. And I realize that that's not something that you're going to do in studio, but if somebody has very low vagal tone, so they're in that like just in that response where they just can't get motivated to do anything. Like they've spent all of their time looking for other people to help them, right? They can't take responsibility for their own care. And I see this normally, I will see it in insurance claims and quite often their workplace insurance claims where people have lost all self-motivation. And quite often they've been under a lot of stress at work. They've been worked to the bone. They've probably been in fight or flee for a long, long time. And eventually their whole body just breaks down. And then they get something like a disc bulge from bending over to flick a switch at work. And then they end up on work cover. Well, they've gone into freeze response. They've gone into this response of they've done everything they can. They probably didn't listen to their body. Their workplace didn't recognize the signs of excessive stress. And now they're in the freeze response. And they can't help themselves anymore. So sometimes those guys, as they come out of the freeze response, so, we've probably spent quite a bit of time with them doing the breathing, doing the humming, sending them home with meditation, sending them home with just all of the other things, observing the experience you're in. When you're making the coffee, you're looking out the window and just observing your environment. We've sent them home with a lot of experiences of just being. We've been doing that in studio, a lot of experience of feeling what you're feeling in the body. Recognize what feels good. Recognize what doesn't feel good. Let's lean towards what feels good. And then we keep playing around with all of that sort of stuff. And then as they're coming good, as you can see that their self-motivation is starting to improve, then we can start to tone the vagus nerve more. So maybe at some stage they get ready for, you know what? Why don't you try putting your hands in the ice? See how it feels. When you're ready, try putting a flannel in the ice bath and then just pop that on your face. And then down the track, maybe it's a few months, maybe it's a year, because you don't end up in that freeze response overnight. This can be a long-term strategy. Eventually you get to the point where you can put your face in the ice. When you're at that point of toning the vagus nerve, then you don't have as much systemic inflammation in the body anymore. So this, I would say, is more of a self-care option for optimal health, not as part of the healing response. I think that's all I've got for you today. Vagus nerve is pretty cool, hey? So just a reminder, if you haven't listened to the last couple of episodes, I forget which episode it is to tell you the truth, but I did let you know that on March the 22nd, I am coupling up with Movementality Education, a mob in Victoria, and I am presenting a workshop that is called Calming the Storm, Pilates for Stress, Anxiety, and the Modern World. If you are listening to this show and it's after the 22nd of March, don't worry. I would love to hear from you because I'm actually going to be recording that workshop and offering it to you guys online. And some of this vagal nerve experiential work will be a part of the workshop. Now, whether or not you realize it, this type of conversation is also had in my teacher training. So I do a 6-month mentor program with people who specifically want to become reformer instructors. I believe that reformer classes can be a huge stepping stone for people to experience Pilates not in a clinical setting. So generally, these are fitness classes. But my teacher training program is really trying to lessen the gap between the fitness experience and the clinical experience, because I believe that Pilates really can play such a positive role on everybody's life if we understand these types of things that I'm talking about, because no matter what type of Pilates you're teaching, you can include this type of information. And when you do, I can tell you now, your clients will come back to you year upon year upon year, and you will see magical things happen in their bodies and in their lives because of the education that you give them. So my teacher training program is specifically on reformer, and we also do teach them that work, but it's with all of these in-depth topics in mind. So it's more than just learning repertoire, and it's learning more than just putting a class together. If you know somebody who is considering becoming a Pilates instructor, this course is now in, as we speak, 4 locations in Australia. It's on the Mornington Peninsula, it's in Byron Bay, it's in Subiaco in Perth, and of course, in my home studio in Darwin. Now, we currently run this course twice a year. It's a 6-month program, and we're also on the lookout for potential host studios to fill in the gaps so that we can offer this program that is recognized and recommended by the Pilates Association of Australia nationwide. I believe that new instructors deserve this in-depth training. And I believe that this is what people are really wanting out of their Pilates experience. So check out the website, thepilatesprofessional.com.au. You could go to either Reformers Certification or Host Studio and see which branch is going to work for you, whether you're looking for certification or whether you're looking to become a host studio. And second of all, I would love to hear from you. My heart and soul goes into this podcast because I believe that we have such an important role to play as Pilates professionals in the world as far as imparting our knowledge and really supporting people, not just towards rehabilitation, but towards optimizing their health. I believe that Pilates really is a key component to that. So if you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review and share it with as many people as you can. Let's get the word out there. Let's make the world a better place through Pilates. And I cannot wait to be speaking to you next week. Every Wednesday, this podcast is released. I'm Katie Crane. This is the Pilates Lounge, and I am the Pilates professional. I'll see you soon.
Now, before I finish up today, I just want to remind you, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you like and share it with your Pilates professional and movement loving friends so that we can get the word out there and really create a community right here in this hub. Be sure to check out my website, thepilatesprofessional.com.au, and have a look if you can find any workshops, which I'm sure you can, that you may be needing right now. Remember, I also do a 6-month reformer teacher training mentor program. I call it a mentor program because I literally personally mentor each student through their own program until they are ready to teach reformer. It's what I specialize in. And I think that this is one of the biggest missing links in our industry right now, is that we have these wonderful diploma level training workshops that people can do to become very comprehensively trained in Pilates. But when it comes to reformer, it's so wishy-washy out there that you could become an instructor online with no personal access to a mentor ever, or you could become a reformer instructor as a stepping stone to diploma level training. So where I come into it is I just do reformer teacher training that is recognized and recommended by the Pilates Association of Australia, which means that my students then become members of PAA. It's super important for our industry, and it's what our students deserve. So if you know somebody who is looking to become a reformer teacher, then this is where you want to send them, the pilatesprofessional.com.au. They can reach out to me. I can have a call with them and see if I have a program that is coming up that is suitable for them. And or I also do a host of online workshops for you to expand your repertoire and your understanding specifically of the Pilates work. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to you listening to the next episode next week. I'm Katie Crane, the Pilates professional.